All right, we got Justin Ferguson on the podcast. And Justin, last night we finally got some NBA basketball that was meaningful and that you can actually look at the stats, not just scrimmaging. So what were your main takeaways from last night's two NBA games?
Well, I mean, one, I think the biggest takeaway for me was just, I think Stan Van Gundy said it last night, and you've heard some other people say it, but it's just, it really kind of set in last night. It's really so impressive, like what the NBA has been able to pull off. Like the fact that this is working and that we are having these games is pretty remarkable. And so to see that, and I thought in the game itself, like we all know that the fans aren't there. We know it's like what it's all going on in the world. But like during the games themselves, like I didn't like, unlike baseball, I didn't feel myself like, oh, it didn't feel weird. It was like when it got heated in both of those games towards the stretch, down the stretch, you were like, oh, this feels like basketball again. Like this feels like another really good basketball game. And so that was really good for me. And I know a lot of people really like that. In terms of the games themselves, I think the biggest takeaway for me was in that second game is just knowing that like LeBron can still turn it on whenever he feels like it. And like wasn't playing a great game and then wins it down the stretch. And his defense was really great. I felt like last night we saw that the Clippers were not quite as deep as the Lakers are right now, but man, I mean, when LeBron can do that in the clutch and AD can play like that all game long, like it's ridiculous.
Yeah, for me, it was kind of concerning watching the Lakers. Yeah, I know it's game one, but the Clippers didn't have Lou Williams. They didn't have Montrezl Harrell. And those two guys were in contention for Sixth Man of the Year. When you have two contenders for Sixth Man of the Year on your bench and they're not there to play, I feel like that was kind of a like if they were to meet in a 7-game series, I'm still going to favor the Clippers, but it's going to go 7 games. And I'm a huge LeBron fan, but that Clippers team is just so deep. And what did you think about Zion? Like he had a minutes restriction, but when he played, I mean, it was just so much fun to watch.
It was, and I tweeted it last night. I was like, I've forgotten how much I missed watching him play because he is such a rare talent in the fact that nobody does quite the same things he can do physically. I think it's like later tonight, on Friday night, Giannis is back. And like, it's like watching him again where you're like, oh, wow, like you missed just watching, just a physical freak do physical freak things, basically, on that end. I just thought like it was really cool to see him get back out there. He played really well. And it's just that minutes restriction. It sucked not to see him in the final few minutes of that game because it was such a close game and you felt like if he had played, the Pelicans probably pulled that off. But yeah, I was really impressed with what I saw from him. And I felt like if they could have kind of timed it up right where, when Ingram was starting to fade a little bit in the second half, that's when he could have kind of come on and pushed it, and it never really came. So it was a combination of Brandon Ingram starting to calm down a little bit offensively and not having Zion out there kind of made a huge difference. But I mean, I thought Ingram hit that shot at the end. Like it was halfway down. It was a beautiful look.
Yeah, it was. And if he would have hit that would have been huge for their playoff push. Because now, look at it. Their schedule, I mean, the NBA is pretty much set up for them to try and make the playoffs. But now that was big for Portland and for Dame and CJ to make that little push. But yeah, like you, I thought that shot was going in. And JJ Redick showed up out of nowhere. And he's made the playoffs every single year he's been in the NBA. And he just continues to show. He's got a great podcast, by the way. And he just continues to show what a baller he is. And that jumper is as smooth as ever. But now I want to shift over to the title favorites. Like I said, if the Clippers and Lakers were to meet in the playoffs, I would still pick the Clippers in 7. So there would be my title favorites versus probably Milwaukee to come out of the East. Who are your two teams that come out in the finals?
I probably would lean the same way as you on this. I like the way the Bucks have been this year. Not only do I think they have the best player in the league right now in Giannis, I think they have the best coach in the league. Mike Budenholzer was an amazing coach in Atlanta, and he's just carried that over in the Bucks, and they've turned into this super team. With them, they are so far ahead of the pack in the East right now, and I just think that combination of coach and star player, they built that team to kind of go around them. I think when you look at the Lakers and the Clippers, they're still earlier in their processes of and having the pandemic and the large layoff didn't help, but like they're still earlier in the process of like figuring out how LeBron and AD all this comes together. For the Clippers, it's Kawhi and PG coming together and that whole crew. Whereas I feel like the Bucks have been doing this for a little bit longer, and I really like them coming out of the East, especially. And I don't know who else. Like, there's going to probably be some other sneaky teams. Like, there's going to be a team that's probably going to catch fire in the bubble, make a run. If anyone's going to like really shake things up in the West, I think I'd be scared of the Thunder just because of the way that team is built and the way that veteran presence they've got. Just Chris Paul in the playoffs. You've got guys like Steven Adams. They're a really deep team. Billy Donovan's a good coach. But I ultimately have to have with you. I think the Clippers. It's going to be Clippers Lakers. I hope we get 7 games of what we had last night because it was phenomenal. And I hope the Clippers can get back to being closer to 100%. It'll be a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, and the way PG-13 was playing last night, it was scary. And and with Kawhi playing the way he does, it was interesting to see LeBron versus Kawhi. They were pretty much going at each other all game. Kawhi got the better of LeBron's a few times. At the end, LeBron, I wouldn't say locked up PG-13 at the end, but he locked up Kawhi to where he had to make the pass to Paul George. LeBron got a little shove in there at the end, and Paul George trying to complain about it, but it was interesting, and I hope, like you, 7 games with those two going at it, guarding each other. I think that's what every NBA fan wants to see. And speaking of those two, the MVP awards, or all the awards, all the stats from before quarantine happened, like none of these stats count towards the awards.
Right.
So before everything started, before everything ended, who was your MVP and why?
Yeah, I think I hinted at it just a second ago. I think it's Giannis. Okay. What LeBron's done this year is incredible, and it's a better story, I would imagine, just because he's doing this late in his career, and the Lakers are now looking like a contender, a really, really strong contender now that they've got AD as well. And AD played out of his mind last night. That was a whole lot of fun to watch too. But Giannis beats him in pretty much every statistical category. And I know that there's going to be a huge push to put LeBron there, but for me and for my money, I would still stick with Giannis just because of the numbers.
Yeah, same here. I mean, if you look at the stats, it's one of the most all-time great statistical seasons of anybody. Like, he's basically a point guard Shaq, if you think about it. And I agree with you. There's a media narrative going around that LeBron deserves it just because, 17th season, 35 years old. But Giannis is putting up these numbers, I think, only playing 31 minutes a game.
Yeah.
Like, he's just not playing an entire quarter, and he's still having one of the best seasons of all time. So it's
ridiculous. He's a ridiculous talent, and he's just going to be running this league for a long time, and so it's just we might as well just get ready for it.
If he gets that 3-point shot down, my God, he's going to win MVP almost every year. It seems like.
Yeah, for sure.
So defensive player of the year, I had Giannis, then Anthony Davis, and my third was Ben Simmons. Who was their top two?
I would go with Giannis at 1, and I like AD at 2. That would be something I'd have to probably consider a little bit more. Rudy Gobert. I think Gobert at 2 kind of makes sense for me because he had some lulls this year, but just when he's on his game, he's the best rim protector in basketball, and it's just teams have to play differently when he's on his game, and we saw a little bit of that last night. Trying to be a little bit better as an offensive one, but solely as a defensive player. I like Gobert. I think Giannis probably takes it this year though, and if he could get the MVP Defensive Player of the Year combo, it just shows how ridiculous this guy is.
Yeah, if you think about it, this has the potential to be one of the most perfect seasons for a player. If you win Defensive Player of the Year, you win MVP, you go to the finals. Say Milwaukee wins that, he's most likely going to win Finals MVP if Milwaukee wins. You talk about one of the best seasons of all time. So,
from anybody,
from anybody.
Complete all around, for sure. And I think there's a really good chance of that happening.
Yeah, I agree. Rookie of the Year, not close in my opinion.
Nope.
Ja Morant's going to run away with it. I had Zion to even crack my top 3. I had Kendrick Nunn second, then Brandon Clark from Memphis. I don't think you have any disagreements with my number 1.
No, I don't. And the 2 and 3 fit as well. I mean, I think if you want to put Zion in there, people would, you could quarrel with it, but it's fine. Brandon Clark has been really, really fun to watch. And that Grizzlies team is going to be really good down the road. I hope they kind of stick together and get the right plan going. But it's Ja and it's clearly him. He's so much fun to watch. He impacts the game really well, and it's just people question would he be able to make that jump from Murray to the NBA like that, and he has, and he's been that kind of offensive playmaker, and he's going to be another one. It's going to be fun to watch that young core for a very long time, and I hope they're able to stick it out.
Yeah, I just hope he learns to land with 2 feet, because some of those
yes.
dunks he has, man, it gives me those Derrick Rose vibes, and just kind of makes me cringe a little bit.
Mm-hmm. No doubt. I there's so much good young talent in the NBA right now, and he's one of those ones where it's like, if the Grizzlies can be back to being a regular playoff team, they're going to scare a lot of people. Like, we know they're building the super teams in LA and all that, but like kind of like how I feel about the Thunder, like that's a dangerous team down the road if they're able to stay together.
Well, yeah, they're just stockpiling draft picks. They got 7 draft picks out of that trade with Paul George.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's incredible.
Mm-hmm. And now moving on to 6th man, I had Montrezl Harrell, then Dennis Schroeder. I was flip-flopping back and forth, but Montrezl Harrell coming off the bench, I don't know why he's not starting for that team. I mean, I guess it's because of, you want that bench to outscore the other team's bench. It's a good way of doing it. But yeah, I had Montrez number 1.
Yeah, I like Trez number 1, but I'm going to go with Schroeder. I think Schroeder is just he has had this like career renaissance in Oklahoma City, and that's a deep team. Like when you don't have Chris Paul on the floor, when you don't have the full complement of that starting lineup, you still aren't thinking you can kind of take it easy on him, because Schroeder's played so well, and I think that role behind a veteran star point guard, kind of being able to play that combo role really well, it suits him very well. And but man, I'm a big Montrezl Harrell fan, and I can't wait to see him back out on the floor again, because I think he's got a lot to provide, and he could be the difference in a championship season. Like, I 100% believe he could be a difference maker.
Yeah, he could be the only person on the Clippers to be able to stop AD, even though that's kind of like an impossible task when they're facing the Lakers. Like last night, it seemed like no matter what or no matter who was put on AD was just going to score at will. And in that third quarter, he just couldn't miss. Couldn't miss a single.
Oh yeah, yeah, and that's the thing that makes the Lakers so scary, because you put Kawhi, and not to say Paul George isn't like, they have good defensive players, but like, you have Kawhi, but he can only stop or try to slow down either one of AD or LeBron, and you probably need him on LeBron more. So yeah, you got to have Harrell out there, and I like Harrell. Like, it's when these moves went down, when they got Kawhi, when they got Paul George, it was like, oh, and they're walking into a team that was already a really good team without a lot of star talent, and they've been able to carry that mentality over, and Harrell's a huge part of it.
Mm-hmm. All right, moving on to most improved player. I had this was a tough one for me. I had Brandon Ingram, and then Devontae Graham, and third I had Bam Adebayo. Brandon Ingram just flourished this year with New Orleans. It makes you think, if the Lakers would have kept Brandon Ingram. I know it's kind of impossible when you're trying to trade for AD, but if you keep Brandon Ingram, it's almost like, I'm not going to say he's going to be a Kevin Durant, but it's like the scoring ability to be Kevin Durant almost.
Yeah.
And you just wonder if they had LeBron, AD, Brandon Ingram instead of, say, Kuzma as their third best player. I mean, they're going to run away with the title if they would have kept Brandon Ingram. But the jump he made, I think last year was 13 points a game to this year's 24 points a game. He is the main guy in New Orleans right now, and I got to give most improved player to him.
I like it, and I would go with that as well. Him being the focal point of an offense, and we'll see moving forward how that him and Zion play together. I think it's a really fun combination moving forward. But being either the number one guy or at least 1A, 1B with Zion is going to be like, that's what he needs to be, because he's got all the weapons. And he's a lot of people want to make the KD comparison because the builds are very similar. But it's just that the fact that he has so many different ways he can score on you. He's very versatile, and he's very confident with his shot from a lot of different areas. I think that's going to be a lot of fun to see. And then your second, I would have probably put Bam. Bam was the one I was really thinking about, closely because it was the Heat have gone through so much, and that roster, just when you looked at them this season, you're like, do you really care about this Heat team? And then the fact that Bam was such a really good story because his numbers exploded this year. He's going to be a lot of fun. He is going to be a lot of fun moving forward, like a lot of these other young guys. But I really like Bam, like coming into his own as like this is a legit potential star center in the NBA.
Yeah, the NBA is in good hands, that's for sure. And the final award, I don't really want to get into like all NBA first team and rookies. That's going to take too long. But Coach of the Year, I had Nick Nurse, Mike Budenholzer second, and then Frank Vogel third. What Nick Nurse has been able to do with Toronto after Kawhi has left to develop Siakam the way he has. I'm not saying it's all Nick Nurse. It's probably, more so Siakam. But the way Kyle Lowry, Serge Ibaka, all these guys, like it's a renaissance or a resurgence, I should say, of all these good players. The way Nick Nurse has been able to keep all of them and to keep them in competition, they could still come out of the East and make a push for the finals.
Oh yeah, I mean, they play so well together as a team, and I talked about how much I like Budenholzer and like why I think he's one of the best coaches in the league. But I think this year, the job that Nurse has done is phenomenal because you lose one of the 5 best players in the NBA, whatever you want to put Kawhi. I think everyone will have him in their top 5. You put him, and he was the difference maker in the fact that you were able to win your first finals, and then you say, and we're still a really good team without with losing this key player. So, I like the system that they run. I like the approach that he takes to basketball, and I mean, this team should not be as good as they are this year, and yet they are. The development of Siakam, who is quickly becoming one of my favorite players in the league, has been specifically fun to watch.
You can honestly put him in the conversation for most improved player again.
Even though exactly. It's crazy.
How much of a jump he's made. It doesn't make any sense.
It's crazy.
So title favorites, it's going to be for you, Milwaukee and Clippers.
Yeah, I think that would be my finals matchup. I would pick. I wouldn't be surprised if it was the Lakers, but I like the Bucks and the Clippers. And if the Clippers are kind of full strength, they would be my favorite. But I could see a 7-game series between those two.
Gosh, I cannot wait. Playoff basketball is just a different animal.
Yep, for sure. And it's going to be fun because it's not going to take too long before we get it.
Oh, yeah. All right, so enough NBA. We're going to move on to a fun segment, 2007 re-recruiting of the college football recruiting class. Let me pull up my notes. This one, 2007 was probably the most insane year in college football history. I looked up some notes on the 2007 year. This featured the I'm a Man on 40 speech by Mike Gundy. Appalachian State beat Michigan. Week 5, 8 teams in the top 25 lost. And I think the next week, USC lost to Stanford after being favored by 41 points. Cal reached its highest ranking since 1951. South Florida was number 2.
Everybody in the Big East was number 2. Yep. Rutgers, Louisville.
Yeah, Kansas was number 2. West Virginia was number 2. Couple more notes. The number 1 and number 2 team lost in the same weekend 3 times. And I think in the 12 years before that, it only happened 4 times.
Yeah.
And it happened 3 times in the same season. Auburn beat Florida, but they also lost to South Florida.
Almost lost to Arkansas in a really horrible game. Yeah, that was such a weird year.
Lost to Matt Flynn on the last second touchdown throw in Tiger Stadium. LSU is the only national champion with 2 losses ever, and they lost in triple overtime twice. So overall, probably the craziest season I've ever seen or witnessed in college football history. Notable names in this draft recruiting class. You had Joe McKnight, Jimmy Clausen, Ryan Mallett, Everson Griffin, who's now one of the most dominant defensive linemen in the NFL, Jason Pierre-Paul, Rob Gronkowski. This draft class or this recruiting class had it all. I'm going to go ahead and start off with number 1. Then you're going to go number 2. And we're just going to go back and forth. Sound good?
All right. So it works for me.
So number 1, I hope we have the same one. It's Cam Newton.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, we all know the story. Didn't really do too much at Florida. Transferred to Blinn College. Possibly the greatest individual season in college football history in 2010. Heisman winner, Davey O'Brien Award, All-American, AP Player of the Year, SEC Player of the Year, national champion. one of only 3 players in history with 30 passing touchdowns and 20 rushing touchdowns in the same season. That would be Tebow and Lamar Jackson. Some really good memories. What was your favorite memory from Cam Newton that year, you think?
So I was a senior in high school in the 2010 season. So that was a particularly fun year for me. Growing up an Auburn fan and being surrounded by Alabama fans, that was a really fun year. The memory I remember the most, so like I went to the Iron Bowl that year with my grandfather. Me and my brother did, and that was insane just to be there for that. But still, the one thing that I will remember the most, it's not the LSU run, because a lot of people want to point that one out, but the Cam Newton play I remember the most, and just being like, oh wow, this dude's from another planet, is when they played South Carolina that year and he dove from the 7 and scored.
Yeah,
it was just that was like, that was the moment where I think me and a lot of other Auburn fans were like, oh wow, like we've got this guy who might be one of the best players we've ever seen. Mm-hmm. And the fact that he did that, and all the memories from that season, the LSU run, still one of the greatest plays I've ever seen. The Iron Bowl, greatest comeback ever. Winning a national championship, all that. But to me, though, just that he dives from the 7-yard line and scores, and it's just like, okay, well, no one else can do that. And so it was like watching, like, if Bo Jackson played quarterback and was just taller.
Yeah,
it was incredible. So yeah, I'm glad. And that's the thing with Cam, though, is like the Cam story. It starts in 2007 at Florida, and if you look back, the 2007 Florida recruiting class might be the most talented recruiting class ever, like on paper.
Probably the most.
And he was, yes, yeah, oh yeah, for sure. But yeah, Cam being number one, and he ended up at Auburn, and it's a weird journey, and now he's a former MVP, and now he's Tom Brady's successor in New England. Mm-hmm. Weird career, but the fact that it started here is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, a couple of memories for me that I really loved was that receiving touchdown against Ole Miss.
Yeah,
that one, I was out of my seat jumping for joy after that one. And probably my favorite one was after he beat Bama and he was running around the field covering up his mouth. And that one was just a slap in the face to all the Alabama fans. That was probably my favorite memory.
One of the craziest things about that game is being at that game and getting that experience, and then going home, and then the next day seeing like, oh, here's what people saw it on TV. Here's there was a lot of stuff that happened in that game that just being in the stadium you didn't really catch as much, and so after the fact you got to kind of relive it over and over again. So yeah, that's running around with the hands over him and Nick Fairley. It's one of the most lasting images of that team.
Yeah, didn't they play Take the Money and Run?
Oh yeah. During warm-ups, yep, for sure. And I do remember that. I don't that was like, all right, here we go. And then you're getting hammered in that game, and you're like, oh well, this sucks. Like, well, at least we're going to the SEC title game, I guess. And then you go, and then and then it was just one of no one could have predicted what was about to happen next.
Yeah. All right, you're up at number 2.
All right, my number 2 is Eric Berry. Eric Berry, he was, one of the best players. Like, if Cam Newton wasn't Cam Newton, he could have been an easy pick as number 1 in this class. Berry, 2-time unanimous All-American. He was widely considered to be the best defensive back in college football for multiple years when he was there. He was Defensive Player of the Year. And then in the pros, 5-time Pro Bowler, 3-time All-Pro. His career gets cut short, which is sad because at his peak, he was the best safety in football. Mm-hmm. Just an absolute machine. And he was, there's no telling, like, he accomplished so much and still had, all this he had to go through. And the fact that he came back from having lymphoma and all this stuff that's happened to him is even more remarkable. But yeah, as a college player, man, he was one of the most feared defensive players I've ever seen. He was an incredible player for sure.
He was my number 2 as well. He beat lymphoma. It's the fact that he came back and still was playing at a high level.
Was a Pro Bowler again.
Yeah. I looked back at some of his highlights, and he would come all the way from the safety position, and whenever there was a screenplay, he would blow it up every time for a tackle for a loss. And it was just the way he was able to read the game in college and for that to carry over in the NFL. Yeah, number 2, 5 stars by 247, and he was 4th nationally by ESPN. So they got that right.
And he was the 5th pick in the draft when he came out of college. So like, yeah, he was one of the few players who lived up to the hype. And you don't get that very often with highly rated recruits, but he was one of them.
All right, so for my number 3, I had Von Miller. Somehow wasn't ranked by ESPN. He was 3 stars by 247.
All right.
Yeah, didn't play linebacker until his senior season. He was on the defensive line. And the one season he played linebacker, he was an All-American, won the Dick Butkus Award, which goes to the most outstanding linebacker. The year before, in 2009, was probably one of the best statistical seasons you can have as a defensive lineman. 21 and a half tackles for loss and 17 sacks, which led the NCAA. And he holds the record for most career sacks in the Big 12. So you're going to go from the defensive line to linebacker. And in that 1 year at linebacker, you're going to be the best linebacker in the country.
Yeah.
So
he's a remarkable player. And like, I'll be honest, when I looked through the list, I was just looking at 5 stars and 4 stars. So there's going to be some guys that fell through the cracks for me, like Von Miller. But I mean, for a minute there was the most feared pass rusher in football. Still is one of the most feared pass rushers in football. And yeah, few times you've ever seen a defensive player just say, "Well, I'm going to control who wins the Super Bowl and who doesn't."
Yeah.
You rarely get that from a guy like that.
Yeah, and it was against Cam Newton. So.
For sure.
Who was your number 3?
My number 3. All right, so I'm going to go with. I went with Rolando McClain. From Alabama. Again, kind of like Eric Berry, did everything you could pretty much accomplish in college. Unanimous All-American, was the Defensive Player of the Year. He won the Butkus. He won the Lombardi. He won a national title. He was the key player for them. Top 10 pick coming out of the NFL, but of course his NFL career did not pan out the way that a lot of people thought it was going to. But I mean, he to me was he wasn't the first, probably, but to me, he's the first, like when I thought of Alabama defenses and Alabama, just those insane linebackers they churned out for over a decade and still are doing it. He's the one where he kind of started that from that Saban linebacker that just could just tear everything up. He was that guy. And yeah, he was one of the best. He's one of the best linebackers I've ever seen in college. It's weird that everything with his pro career didn't turn out the way everyone thought it was going to, but no, in college he was just a different type of dude for sure.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that, I literally had that in the same thing in my notes. He really was the first of Saban's linebackers that kind of really kickstarted that Saban all-time defense talk. When we talk about the 2010, 2012, that's what really, really started the defense going. So for number 4, that's up to you.
It's up to me. All right. I'm going to go back to Florida. There's a few Florida guys on this list. I'm going to go Joe Hayden at 4.
All right.
Joe Hayden, again, another top 10 pick from that defense. Unanimous All-American, Thorpe Award. I don't know if did he win the Thorpe? No, he didn't win the Thorpe, but Defensive Player of the Year by a couple of places. Won a national title. Ended up being a really good Pro Bowl. He made a Pro Bowl last year, which I thought was pretty remarkable. He's had a little renaissance himself with the Steelers. Lockdown, and like everyone in that era for Florida, you want to think about the offense, and there's a few of those players on there. You just want to think about the offense and how great they were. But I mean, he was and still is a lockdown corner, and was a highly rated recruit coming out of high school, and lived up to the hype. And yeah, unanimous All-American, national champion, Defensive Player of the Year. Checking all those boxes on a team that was already stacked on defense. That shows you just how good he was.
Yeah, yet again, a part of that legendary period of Florida where they were just getting so many –
everybody.
Yeah, they're getting everybody. And we're going to mention a few more Florida players in this down the line, I'm pretty sure. I had him pretty lower on my list, but, yeah, he would lock people up, and he was really good just locating the ball and swiping it away. And I wouldn't say, his NFL career was as good as his college career, but it's still a solid career.
The fact that he made the Pro Bowl last year is pretty incredible because he's been in the game for a while.
Yeah. My number 4 was Golden Tate.
Mm-hmm.
Him and Jimmy Clausen were one of my favorite duos watching college football growing up. He had a particular game in his senior season, or I don't know if it was senior season, but it was last year at Notre Dame, where he went up against Richard Sherman and absolutely just left them in the dust.
Yeah.
Let me see here. Notre Dame that year lost all their games by combined 29 points and lost by single digits each game they lost that year. They ended up being 6-6, but they were very competitive throughout each game. You know, kind of feel sorry for Golden Tate because on a national stage, he would have just balled out. 2009 All-American, the Fred Biletnikoff Award. In 2009, he had 1,500 receiving yards and 17 touchdowns. 4 stars coming out by 247 and 11th overall by ESPN. He was my number 4. So now I moved on to number 5. I had Ryan Kerrigan. 3 stars by 247, not ranked by ESPN. Remembered more in the NFL than in college, but that's not to say he wasn't great in college. I just, during that time, I never really watched Big Ten football. He was at Purdue. But Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year, All-American, leads the Big Ten in career sacks and tackles for loss, and he's second all-time in NCAA history in career forced fumbles. So the guy was a monster at Purdue, and I'm interested to see what your number 5 was.
My number 5 was Golden Tate, so I had him right off of that, and I agree. I mean, was the best receiver from there, and there's a couple other really good receivers on this list, but yeah, Tate was, didn't quite end up being. He's not quite the the superstar in the NFL, but he's still been a really good receiver, and but in Notre Dame he was just an unreal talent for sure.
Mm-hmm. All right, you're up at number 6.
Number 6, I'm going to go back to Florida one more time, and I'm going to go with, on defense, Carlos Dunlap. Still doing it at a really high level in the NFL, but another All-American, highly rated player at his position. He was the feared pass rusher on that Florida defense. You had Hayden locking it down. In the secondary, you had so many really good players on that team. Dunlap was a dude that just is just timeless. Just you got to worry about him on the edge, and another one of those guys who's a highly rated dude and lived up to it at Florida. And some guys at Florida didn't live up to it, but him and Hayden were definitely 2 of them.
Yeah, it's so crazy to think how talented that Florida team was. I know we're going to keep talking about that, but that team and that recruiting class has got to be the best recruiting class of all time. It really has to be.
Mm-hmm.
Number 6 for me, I had Rolando McClain. We already touched on him a little bit, so we really don't have to get into that. So for number 7, I had Des Bryant.
Mm-hmm.
Played 3 years, but his 3rd year was cut short. And I don't remember this, but the NCAA declared him ineligible for lying about his relationship with Deion Sanders.
Mm-hmm.
So his 3rd year was cut short, got ready for the NFL draft. Worked out for him. But in 2008, he was an All-American, led the Big 12 in receiving yards and receiving touchdowns and in punt return touchdowns. And when you look back at Oklahoma State's schedule, if they had Dez that entire year, they were going to compete for a national championship, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But because of his, breaking their agency rules in the NCAA and all that crap, he couldn't.
I had Dez at 7 as well, so that's a pretty good timing by us. Agreed with that. Yeah, he's one of those guys in that Oklahoma State era where when Oklahoma State was scary, it's just that it was Des Bryant and they've had some really good offensive players since then. But again, to me, he's the first superstar I remember coming out of Oklahoma State of this era. I mean, of course, they had some way back in the day, but that Gundy era type of player. Bryant's definitely there. I'll go to 8. 8 is not necessarily the most accomplished player on this list, but he was a 5-star, and he was a guy that was a personal favorite of mine, and it's Noel Devine.
Okay.
Noel Devine almost single-handedly beat Auburn in 2009 when they had their wild comeback in the rain game. But probably the owner of the greatest high school highlight film of all time, Noel Devine is. If you haven't watched that, it's incredible. But that whole that whole team they had back in the day, it was Rich Rod at his finest, and he was the zone read was still kind of a new thing, and it was him running it, and it's just they were absolutely just terrifying to watch. And Noah Devine was that guy for me because he was just a really, really fun running back, smaller guy, but just was a touchdown waiting to happen. And so I got him at 80.
Yeah, I did not have him in my top 15.
Mm-hmm.
To be honest with you, don't really remember much about him. I do remember the name, but I don't remember much about him. But for my number 8, I had Earl Thomas. Obviously,
there you
go. More remembered for his NFL success with Seattle, boom. But at Texas, redshirt his first year and only 2 playing seasons. Was an All-American, led the Big 12 in interceptions in 2009, and led the NCAA in touchdown returns and interceptions. So a ball hawk in college translated to a ball hawk in the NFL. Earl Thomas was the number 8. So now number 9, I had Tyrod Taylor.
Same here.
All right.
There we go. We've had a couple of these.
Yeah. Virginia Tech, they always seem to have that dual threat guy at quarterback throughout every single year. Started all 4 years, had a pretty good highlight reel. Had at least 10 wins in each of his 4 seasons. So you got to give credit to just winning overall. His stats weren't particularly good when throwing the football. Only had a 57% completion percentage, but he still made plays. 2010 was his best year by far. Sweep the ACC books for awards. Won the Offensive Player of the Year. Won the Player of the Year in the ACC. Led the ACC in total yards per play. One of my favorite players. Watching him in the NFL, still one of my favorite players. Even now he's a backup.
Yeah, he's a fun one for sure. And again, another one of those guys where you think about that era and you think about what he was able to put up. And before Clemson kind of had this run that they went on, before Florida State had their run as well, it was that Virginia Tech. He kind of took some of that. Some of that shine as one of the ACC's top guys. My number 10, if it would have, I feel like if I was ranking this like in terms of accomplishments, he would have been higher. But the position he plays gets him a little bit. But one of the best to play the position, still is one of the best to play the position. Number 10, back to Florida again, Marquise Pouncey, best center in college football during his career there. He is still one of the best in the game. He's made the Pro Bowl 8 times, including the last 4 years of his NFL career. He's a 2-time All-Pro, was Rookie of the Year, was an All-Rookie player, won a national title, won an SEC title, was a consensus All-American, was the Remington Award winner, has had 121 starts in his NFL career, which is pretty remarkable. But all those pieces of that Florida offense, I know centers don't get the love that they should, but this dude was a highly rated center coming out of high school. Lived up to the hype and is still doing it now. And not all the Pouncey's worked out, but he definitely did.
Yeah, my number 10, same as you, was Marquise Pouncey, so we're getting pretty good at this.
There we go.
The blocking grades he had in college were incredible. Like, I'm not going to act like I know a lot about NFL blocking, but
it's tough.
Yeah. On Wikipedia, though, he had an average grade of 91.5%, which is an A in most schools. Elementary school, for me, that was a B. But that average grade is ridiculous when it comes to an offensive lineman. Like you said, Dave Remington Award for the most outstanding center. He was my number 10. Moving on to number 11, I had, I hope I don't butcher his last name, Prince Amukamara. Prince Amukamara.
Prince Amukamara, yep.
Yes. 3 stars, not ranked by ESPN. Mike Mayock, when Prince was coming out of college and declaring for the draft, he had him only second behind Patrick Peterson as the top cornerbacks coming out. So another lockdown corner in this recruiting class. Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year, All-American in 2010, led the Big 12 and was second in the NCAA in passes defended in 2010. So very good at locating the football. Number 11 was Prince.
I like that one. And like I said, I really went through just the 5s and 4 stars. Some of the 3s slipped my radar. I'm going to another one that was highly ranked. Guy number 11, Cameron Hayward, which surprisingly enough has been a better NFL player in the last few years than the early in his career.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, however, another All-American at Ohio State. One of the first guys I remember Ohio State coming to the South to get. He is from the Atlanta area. And yeah, just a real menace as a pass rusher. Won the Big Ten every year he was in. It was in college. Was an All Big Ten player. Consensus All American. Consensus All American as a freshman, which is really hard to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like Hayward a lot, and yeah, for some reason his last few years of his NFL career has been his best one. So he's still in the forefront of a lot of people's minds. So I have Hayward there at 11.
Yeah, I was on the cusp with him. He was outside, just outside of it, but yeah, thought about him as well. All right, so you're up for number 12.
Number 12. Here's a fun one. Rob Gronkowski.
Woo, okay.
Rob Gronkowski. You may so he became a superstar because he was the go-to guy, of course, for Tom Brady, and his legend exploded from there. But in college, he was really good. He was an All Pac-10 player. He was an All-American for a little while, and then he goes immediately into, pretty much immediately into the NFL and just starts tearing it up because it was just this unreal, we had never seen somebody like that before in terms of tight ends in that era. The really good tight ends were the Tony Gonzalez's and the Vernon Davises and stuff like that. This was a dude that was okay, if you split him out wide, he's just no one can cover him.
Yeah.
And so the renaissance of the position, his college career was not as great as some of these other guys on the list, but then when you look at his NFL career, and it's just still going on surprisingly, I got Gronk there in a spot, and he was a 4-star coming out of high school. So people thought he was pretty big, and he was a real big get for Arizona back in the day.
Yeah, I did not have him in my top 15 just because his stats really weren't what they were in the NFL. Could block really well, coming out of college, and when you have that mix of blocking and pass catching ability as a tight end, people consider him the best tight end of all time. I'm not going to go in depth about that, but when you're labeled as that, you're going to be pretty high on the list. So for number 12 for me, I had Nick Fairley.
Okay, I like it.
Didn't play his first 2 seasons, I believe. His first year starting was kind of quiet, but 2010 just exploded onto the scene. Was an All-American, a Vince Lombardi Award. Led the SEC in tackles for loss and in sacks. And for a defensive tackle to lead a conference in sacks is very, very hard to do. I mean, double teams all the time. And I just remember him. Maybe it was LSU's quarterback or Alabama's quarterback at the time. He picked up and just threw down onto the ground. The guy was he was an angry, angry football player, vicious. And it's kind of sad, not sad, but I wish his NFL career would have flourished like it did at Auburn. He had a few good seasons, but I think that 2010 year was his best year as a football player overall.
Oh yeah, and the thing with Fairley that was really cool to see is that we had a little bit earlier, Ndamukong Suh had been that guy where it's we were now starting to think of tackles more, and we see it today with Aaron Donald might be the best player of the league in the NFL. But starting to think of defensive tackles as game-changing pass rushers, and the fact that there had been so much in football over the last, really for a long time, but the last couple of decades that had been so focused on edge rushers and offensive tackles. And it was if you're spending all your money on your tackles, guard and center usually are your lower value guys. If you could get a dude who can pass rush down the middle, you can take advantage of an inefficiency in the market, basically. And on top of that, any quarterback will tell you the last thing they want is somebody pass rushing them right in their face. You don't want that coming straight at you, because edge rushing, at least you can escape that. A guy like Aaron Donald comes down the middle, you're done. And so what Fairley did is Fairley kind of picked up where Suh was, and then I think we've seen just this constant run of pass rush and defensive tackles, and he was on the early end of that. And yeah, Auburn doesn't win the national title if they don't have Nick Fairley. As great as Cam Newton was, they don't have him because he was one of those guys. The defense wasn't great, but he could end drives himself, and he could stop teams dead in their tracks, especially in the fourth quarter. He was such a great clutch player on the defense side of the ball. Yeah, I like that spot there for Fairley too. Another guy who had to go to JUCO to kind of get things going in his career and ended up working out.
So 13 now. I had Joe Hayden. We already talked a little bit. Yet again, Florida just bringing in all these recruits. So we're going to move on to your number 13.
Yeah. All right. So my number 13, this is the last of like the All-Americans that I could find that like really stood out to me or like key pros. And then my last two are just two guys I really liked in college, kind of some college all-stars. This one, Brian Balaga, still doing it as one of the better offensive linemen in the league. Really good guard. I know guard's kind of underrated, kind of like with what we saw with Pouncey, but All-American, high 4-star, still doing it at a high level, at Pro Bowl level in the NFL. And yeah, kind of underrated in the fact that, you know, he played at Iowa in a stretch where Iowa wasn't great. But like if he played at Ohio State, man, he'd have been a household name coming out of college.
Yeah, he was number 14 for me. So moving on to 14, yeah, he started as a true freshman. College Football Reference literally doesn't have him anywhere. Like, it just doesn't exist. So I had to go to Wikipedia to get some of his stats. Yeah, Big Ten Offensive Lineman of the Year in 2009, still kicking ass in the NFL. Yeah, Brian Balaga was 14 for me. So now on to your number 14.
My number 14. So my last two picks are just guys I liked in college. They're like some, and there were 4 stars coming out, so it was kind of made right. Going back to Florida one more time, Chris Rainey. Chris Rainey, everyone remembers those really good Florida teams, and they remember Percy Harvin, and they remember, you know, Tebow and Lake and all those guys, and just how good that team was. Man, Chris Rainey, when like there were a couple of years where like Chris Rainey was like, all right, if he touches the ball, he's gone. Like, don't worry about it. And he was one of those, like, could get the ball on sweeps. He was a good out of the backfield. He was a heck of a return man. It was just a fun player to watch, and so I wanted to give him some love on that Florida team. Get a Florida skill player on here, and Rainey's at 14 for me.
All right, and now the last pick, another Florida guy. I got Aaron Hernandez at 15.
Yeah.
Yep, was part of that otherworldly offense with Tebow and Percy Harvin and Hernandez. Could do a little bit of everything with blocking, catching. You think back to Rob Gronkowski. Aaron Hernandez kind of fit that same mold almost. While he was at Florida, was the 2009 John Mackey Award winner, which is the best tight end in the country. Second in the SEC in receptions in 2009. That's pretty good for a tight end. So, yeah, 15 was Aaron Hernandez.
I didn't put him on there out of principle, but yes, he probably deserves a spot on there. I just did some of that there. 15, I'm going to go with one more player. I didn't think he was a 4-star, and then I looked it up. I was like, I got to give him some love here. 15, just as a fun pick to end it, a guy that I thought was like, every time I watched him, I was like, there's no reason this dude should still be standing at the end of the game or like playing like he can. And that is former South Carolina quarterback Stephen Garcia. Unbreakable type of dude, had some swagger to him. And then they had Connor Shaw, who was like very much the similar kind of thing. But yeah, Stephen Garcia, man, like Stephen Garcia was the architect of one of the big Alabama losses ever. Yeah, just a fun player, and he kind of tapped into some of that Spurrier kind of magic a little bit for South Carolina those early days.
Yeah, that's my favorite memory of him, which is beating Bama. It's that kind of hard to believe that it was Stephen Garcia. You see all those little stats that CBS would pull up for an Alabama game of quarterbacks of the mold that beat Saban. It was Nick Marshall.
Oh, yeah.
It was a dual threat quarterback, and then you had Stephen Garcia as the outlier. So that was probably my favorite thing about Garcia. Who were some of your honorable mentions that didn't make the top 15?
You know, Hernandez was one of them that I think was the big standout to me in my mind. I felt like a few of them that I pitted. I didn't have a whole lot of cuts. If I'd have dug down into those 3 stars, I would have probably found some more, like Von Miller, some of those guys. Looking back, I was like, probably should have had him on there if I'd have dug in a little bit more. But yeah, I stuck to the 4s and 5s and just kind of rearranged them as much as I could. But yeah, going your list. I like your list a lot more because you dug into those 3 stars. But yeah, I feel like, man, Von Miller. That's the one I'm sitting there like I should have found a way to put him on there.
Mm-hmm. Well, last week when I was with Nathan and we did 2006, he had Case Keenum, and he leads in college football in passing yards all time. And I didn't even have him on my list. I didn't even know in that recruiting class. So I'm with you.
A legend.
Yeah,
a legend for sure.
I had 2 honorable mentions. Javid Best from Cal.
Okay. I almost put him on. I'm glad you brought him up. He was one of the ones I went back and forth on.
Really had a scary moment with that injury he had with the concussion. It was really sad to watch, but he made the most out of it afterwards, getting drafted in the first round. Didn't lead the NCAA in anything, but was top 10 in almost every category for the then Pac-10, now Pac-12, obviously. Led the Pac-10 in rushing yards one year. Had 15 rushing touchdowns in the same year, which was second in the conference. And my other honorable mention was J.J. Watt. He was 2 stars coming out of high school, committed to Central Michigan and played tight end, but then transferred to Wisconsin.
Walked on.
Yeah, you said walk on, right?
I believe he was a walk on and then ended up getting a scholarship after transferring.
Yeah, was the 2010 Ronnie Lott Trophy Award winner. Stats don't really tell the whole story with him, but now you can see in the NFL.
Oh yeah,
one of the most dominant, if not the most dominant, besides Aaron Donald, defensive lineman in the NFL.
Yeah, he's a remarkable story for sure. And I know some people kind of feel like he's corny and all that, but like, man, you got to look at what that dude's gone through to get to where he is. It's awesome.
Exactly. All right, Justin, I've had a really fun time with this. Thank you.
Yeah, man.
For coming on. And I hope everything with the athletic and everything works out for you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's a whole lot of fun. I'm glad you had me on. I love coming on and just talking about just stuff that has, nothing to do necessarily with Auburn or necessarily to do with work or whatever radio looks like. So this was a whole lot of fun.
And where can people who listen to this find you, like on social media and everything?
Yeah, the easiest way to get up with me is on Twitter. It's jfergusonau. You can follow me there. We'll see what the future holds with me in terms of writing again. But yeah, I'm also on the lunch break on ESPN 1067 in Auburn from 11 to 1 on weekdays. And you can listen to that on espnau.com, or we are on podcast everywhere.
All right, man. Have a good one.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yep. Where's the stop?